The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome to today's podcast episode, I believe 613. I lose track. I really never know what episode I'm in until I've looked at the previous episode, but I digress. There are so many things happening in the world around us. North Korea has shown no indication that they're going to denuclearize or make good on their promises. That's not even really breaking news. That's exactly what I expected. And that's not even what I'm going to talk about today. I actually just want to talk about something that my pastor talked about in church last night. Stay with me. Don't cut it off. Don't cut off the episode. I went to Bible, I go to church now. I for 5 years in Boston, I didn't go at all, but I go to church now. And anyway, he said something really important last night, and he was speaking directly to me. At least I felt like he was, because he said that, just plain and simple, it's common sense. You don't need the Bible to teach you this, but he used a scripture to teach that when you see a problem, you need to address a problem right then. Don't wait until it grows. Right? Nip it in the bud. Now, why that's relevant to me in the conversation today is because my MO has been the following. I intentionally do not get into, I intentionally give people space, and I intentionally avoid certain confrontations because we all have our lanes. And if I confronted everything that needed to be confronted, I'd be fighting every single day. And I've got a life to live. I just want to live longer. I don't want to, spaz out after fighting 30 hours a day. Exactly. Right. But it has become my MO. It's become my go-to. I see things that I disagree with and I think are problematic, but because my platform, particularly on Twitter, is relatively large, it's not really big, but it's relatively big. And I don't want to seem like I'm going around just stomping on people's, I'm like a gatekeeper. I've always tried to avoid that because I'm not that. I'm giving you all of this introduction because, I like to take the long way around so that you can understand my reasoning and rationale. The reason the message stood out to me is because the truth of the matter is if you don't address something head on, you allow it to become a cancer, and it becomes a big problem. And this was the case with the so-called progressives who wanted to align with the alt-right or some alt-right celebrities or whatever version they want to convince you. I didn't ignore it. I just kept my eye on it. And then all of a sudden it was so big that it became a scorched earth battle. I'm getting ready to broach a topic that's probably going to be a scorched earth battle. But you know what? It's my fault because I haven't been addressing it from the beginning on my platform. Now, here's the reality of all these things. Like with every ideology, every train of thought, every policy position that you feel is problematic, they don't ever really go away. It's not as though we have the ability to destroy those things. You can't really destroy an idea or a belief. But what you can do is establish on your platform, in your circle, in your space, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Very similar to what I discussed in terms of international relations and international policy, foreign policy, that we really don't have the ability to affect the outcomes, not yet, but we certainly have the ability to affect how we perceive them and what we believe about those issues, particularly in our circles. So I'm not saying this as some type of grandiose thing like, oh, I'm the guy who's going to go in and stop this. No, it's absolutely going to be a problem in perpetuity. But nevertheless, is what I'm looking for. Nevertheless, I need to let it be known. You ready? Black people. Hell of an introduction, hell of a transition. Black people who are telling you that we as other black people should not be concerned with what's happening at the border and not be concerned with what's happening to immigrants in general, and saying things like, this is not our fight. They are no more interested in true liberation than a white supremacist. They want black liberation, but they want a particular black liberation. They want a conservative version of black liberation, and not even the Ben Carson conservative or the traditional black conservative, but a very nationalistic conservative. And before I go into any further description of them and their ideology and why it's problematic, let's just begin with the obvious. First of all, two things. There are such things as black immigrants. I know that might be shocking to some people because they have such a narrow and myopic view of the world that they simply cannot understand the fact that there are Afro Latinos, there are people from Central America of African descent. It's the best way for me to categorize, the broad categorization. But there are. And if you're really concerned about black people, you would be concerned about black people no matter where you find them. But then again, the second part of this is if you're concerned about human beings, you should be concerned about human beings no matter where you find them, particularly marginalized and oppressed people around the world. There is no solidarity. There is no liberation. We're not all free until we're all free. None of us are free until we're all free. And so this idea, and you know what it is? It's because just like everything else, there is a group that you can monetize if you feed them exactly what they want to hear instead of giving them what they need to hear. There's always going to be black people are some of the most conservative people in the world, right? We are religious. I mean, look at me, as skeptical as I am, as much of a humanist as I am, I'm still religious. So, if a person like me is religious, there's a good chance that the overwhelming majority of black people are extremely religious. And the odd thing about it is that this problem that we're seeing isn't coming from the religious community much as like the black agnostic community of people who focus far more on nationalism, people who believe that religion is a scourge to the black community, right? There's the black Hotep nationalist movement, that's more specifically the group who's going to be telling other black people that we should not care about immigrants. That's the irony of this. Right? There is conservatism that is nationalistic, and then there's conservatism that is based on religion. Exactly the same paradigm. My God, this might need to be, whenever I get a chance to go back to a PhD program and actually get my PhD, maybe that should be the framework of my dissertation, right? Is to analyze nationalistic conservatism versus religious-based, social-based conservatism. Because you see those trends everywhere. I talked about it with Professor Sinkowitz in terms of what's happening in Israel politics, the internal politics of Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud. And we talked about it in terms of the Republican Party, where you have now this new marriage between nationalistic conservatives, people who are agnostic or atheists, but they're conservative. And you have a marriage between them and the evangelicals for political purposes. You don't have that marriage in the black community, but you have that dichotomy in the black community. You have the nationalistic conservatives, more generally known as Hoteps, and other variations thereof, right? Hoteps is just kind of like a catch-all. And then you have conservatives who are religious-based conservatives. So the black community is extremely conservative, but what you find in what separates us is who we are willing to fight for. And when I say they, let me be specific. You have a strand, you have a group in the black community who see it very profitable to talk about the need to keep separate from everybody else. The only thing that matters are black issues. The only liberation that really matters is black liberation. And we should not be fighting for immigrants, even if they're immigrants of color, even if they're immigrants of African descent, because you know what? They don't ever fight for us. Number one, that's not true. But number two, if that was true, what we are fighting for are the very things that would keep us from being oppressed. And so be it. I'm sorry if what I'm fighting for benefits someone else. If that bothers you, that what I'm fighting for is going to be beneficial to people who are not black. But that's the most asinine excuse for you to be complicit with these crimes that could eventually come and bite our community in the ass. So anyway, this idea that we as black people, you know, and it's replicated, obviously it's replicated in the white community, but it's replicated in the white community from a position of power, right? Because white nationalists, they are in a position of power to actually hurt and oppress marginalized communities and immigrants. Black people, generally, we did not create the power structure, and we're generally not in charge of the power structure. And so the way we become complicit with it is not working through the system. We're not like a bunch of ICE agents, or we're not in the Department of Homeland Security. We're not in HHS. We're not in Donald Trump's White House. We're not in the corridors of power to make these decisions. But the way we become complicit with it is by allowing that bigotry. Yes, it is bigotry and it's ignorance, by allowing it to make us silent and to demand silence and to demand that other black people stand down. So while one form of nationalism is from a position of power, the other form of nationalism is in the position of being simply complicit through demanding silence. This is a problem. This is a problem that pre-exists my decision to talk about it, right? It goes way back. I mean, back to our liberation in the first place, right? This strand, I keep saying strand, but I mean strain, this strain of blackness in the black community that prefers segregation, right? That prefers, that believes that the solution to all the problems in the black community is for us to only be black. And actually, let me finish describing this community, because they are going to absolutely dismiss anything that is LGBTQ. And they're going to dismiss anything that is pro-woman outside of the approved patriarchal framework, outside of the approved black patriarchal framework. They don't even believe that black people can have a patriarchal structure. They don't believe that black men can have a black male supremacy over women, black women. Right? Because their justification of this is that, oh, well, you have to have power, and black people don't have power. Power is relative. Power is relative. And to dismiss that is so intellectually dishonest. No, black patriarchy is nothing compared to white patriarchy, historically or otherwise. Right? But there is a power structure in the black community. I mean, just look. I'm not going to take this episode to help explain to people the black patriarchy. I'm not. If you don't want to see it, you just don't want to see it, and therefore you are the problem, and we have to go through you. But the bottom line is that there are power structures inside of the black community, and you will find that the same people who are telling you not to be concerned with immigrants are the same people who will call their woman a queen, but then expect her to know her place. Right? They give this pseudo uplift of women. It's pseudo. It's not really a true uplift of women, because any woman that's out of her place, call me king. You're my queen, but if you didn't fix my breakfast on time, then I got a problem. These problems, and it's amazing. I'm staggering. I'm stammering. I'm hesitating. I'm stuttering, because it is a frustrating thing when you realize that people who have overcome oppression are now the perpetrators of their own oppression. Of course, this should not be shocking to me, but it's just something that it's something that you have to regularly come to grips with. I remember I completely separated from this world. I completely separated from this world out of necessity, because the level of ignorance rivals that of evangelical Christians, of conservatives, of people. The level of ignorance and willful ignorance and opportunistic ignorance rivals that of people who believe that Nazis were left wing. So I had to separate myself from that world, and I intentionally avoided even getting into those arguments because I was like, you know what, just let them have their lane. But now, people cross lanes. They get out of order. They got out of order. And now they're attacking black folks who are fighting on behalf of immigrants at the border. And it's important that we can't nip this in the bud because it's been here. It's always going to be here. But we need to just make it loud and clear that we as African Americans, we as Black Americans, whatever your diasporic identity, we absolutely have the right and the moral responsibility to fight on behalf of marginalized people wherever we find them, whatever their religion, whatever their lack of religion, whatever their orientation, whatever their gender, whatever their race, ethnicity. It doesn't matter. We who have fought and carry the mantle of civil rights and liberation, we have the moral responsibility to continue doing that and not use our moment, our fleeting moment of liberation, a modicum of liberation, because it's not even full liberation. We're still getting killed in the streets. But this modicum of liberation that we have, we dare not allow that to turn us into the oppressors. And that is exactly what is at the core, the bottom, the logical conclusion of that conservative nationalism that exists in the Black community. So yesterday, Donald Trump signed an executive order, which was not necessary. And that particular point is important as I go through it. But he signed an executive order that ostensibly brought an end to the separation of families and children from the parents who are seeking asylum in the United States. And I want to share something that I read from an attorney online, and because it gives a very succinct overview of the executive order. And I want to preface this by saying that Donald Trump is a master of marketing. He is a master of the media. And if we are not careful, we will allow all of this energy that we had to bring him to shame. It will be converted into us being complicit because we believe we got a victory when we really didn't. So here's a breakdown. Number one, families will not be immediately separated, but they will still be held in detention together. Crossing the border, quote, illegally will no longer be deemed a civil violation, but will be deemed a criminal violation. And this is the critical point right here. It is the fact that the parents are being charged as criminals that forces the separation. And this executive order is essentially codifying that. Because it's a criminal violation, the parents will be charged criminally, and at that point, their children will still be forcibly taken. The executive order will provide a provision that families will be expedited through the criminal process. This means that the removal of their children will be expedited. They're still going to need to build tent cities because of the overabundance. There's still going to be tender age facilities, that jails, cages for toddlers and infants. The thing that made Rachel Maddow break down on the news the other day. So everything that we've forced Donald Trump to this point to even make a public relations stunt concession, because this is all that this was. He didn't have to sign an executive order, but he needed to take off as much pressure as possible. And if we are foolish enough to think that we've won, then we are going to be complicit with the exacerbation of the problem. I mean, the problem is literally poised to get worse because of this executive order. And even more so because of the pressure that has been released off of President Trump. I mean, we finally have found something. It's a shame that it took this. But we have finally found something that is shameable for Donald Trump. I didn't believe that there would be any limits to his shamelessness, but we finally have found something that is shameable. And the first thing that he does is a brilliant political PR move, rather, to release the pressure, and people are buying into it. The executive order is not a victory. They are still going to separate families. They are still going to put families in cages, and then they're going to separate those families and put parents in separate cages than their children. There has to be a solution to this problem. There are solutions. The Trump administration is not looking for solutions. The Trump administration is actually seeing how far they can go to pacify white nationalism in their support base. That's 100% what this is about. In terms of solution, Chris Hayes actually shared a tweet that I think I didn't know about this program, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning. He said, quote, "If only there was some alternative to family detention." He said, wait, there is one. A successful case management pilot program that the Trump administration shut down. He said, check out this statistic. 99% of participants successfully attended their court appearances and ICE check-ins. Literally, a program that ICE shut down that had unbelievable results in managing this influx of refugees with a success rate of 99%. So to suggest that there was no solution, I think Donald Trump shared a video of all the previous presidents and Democrats and then he claimed that out of all their talking, they didn't have a solution, but there actually was a pilot program that Donald Trump shut down, exacerbating the problem, making the problem worse, and then seizing upon this to pacify white nationalists, and then turn around and try to get credit for being the good guy with this executive order that actually is designed to make the problem worse. We're dealing with cartoonish level villains here. I mean, this is really 100% about identity. I mean, I don't really have another word. I wanted to segue into identity politics, but I mean, really, this has nothing to do with anything. This is not even about border control, because they have undermined the program that actually brought more control. This is 100% about that crowd that was celebrating last night at a Donald Trump rally. Those white folks who were on the CNN interview where they were like, oh, spare me all the tears. They're trying to make us cry over these children. Their parents shouldn't have broke the law. This is 100% about pacifying white nationalism in our country, which is 100% a white identity. And this is why identity politics is so important, because we're fighting a machine now. The government you thought it was bad under the control of neoliberals and Democrats. The government is under the control of neoliberals and white nationalists. We can't even get to I said this on the episode. We can't even get to addressing capitalism because now it's buffered. It's protected and buffered by white nationalism. And people who are willing to sacrifice their best economic interest in favor of this styled identity politics. This is why I'm so adamantly on the side of identity politics right now, because this is the framework against which we're fighting. This is literally the problem. This is the driving force. The driving force behind all of this bigotry that we're seeing right now, all of the problems that we have right now, everything that's happening on the border, the driving force that is pushing it, the impetus, is white identity. There's nothing economic about this. In fact, the actions are detrimental to our economy. And this is why it's so important for us to point out that, yes, we must attack the weaponization of identity politics as it is used by the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party, the corporatists in the Democratic Party, to stifle and to silence leftists and socialists and democratic socialists. Yes, we must address that. But now one of them is in power. excuse me, I went back into my native vernacular. Not a single person that we focus on right now is in power, and yet instill the economics that we are so concerned about, and rightfully so. They are being devastated by the people in power, and they're being devastated because they have been put in power by white identity. And this is why we have to put our focus right now in this season, not on trying to win Donald Trump supporters. Do you understand that all they want, what makes them get up in the day? You don't want me to oversimplify and generalize this, people. This faction, I'm sorry to tell you and be the one to break the bad news to you. This faction of Donald Trump supporters who still support him despite of what he's doing at the border, they are there precisely because of what he's doing at the border. And we cannot waste a single moment trying to convert them. They are deplorables. They are not reachable. And even if we could reach them, what do we have to sacrifice in order to reach them? We have to put them completely and utterly back into the dregs of society. And it is completely around based on identity. They don't give a damn about your economic principles. They will gladly sacrifice a safety net program like welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, because they think it's going to benefit some black folks or immigrants. And if you can't understand that as a leftist, as an ally, what the hell is wrong with you, man? Come on. You're being, I think at this point, it's being intellectually dishonest, right? If after hearing what I just explained, you can't see the problem, then I have to really, I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. And I think that you all are smarter than that. What I think, though, if I were to be gracious and not say that people are being disingenuous, I would say that you have found a lane, and it's hard to get out of that lane. We're going at such a high speed. Some of us are going. I'm being extremely generous right now. Imagine going at a high speed and trying to shift gears and shift lanes. It's very difficult. But I'm telling you, I am imploring you. I'm begging you to understand that what we are fighting, the power structure right now, the people who are in power running our power structure, those people are in power. Donald Trump's administration is in power because they of white identity. They still support Donald Trump because of their white identity. They are okay what's happening at the border because of their white identity. And we will never get to address the economic failings of this neoliberal economic order because it is buffered and protected by white identitarians. One last story, and this is a tragic story, just another police shooting. I want to preface it by saying some of the criticisms and some of the arguments that you get from black nationalists and Hoteps, that general broad stroke crowd, is that we don't put as much emphasis on stories of black people who are killed as we do put energy in stories like what's happening in the border. I can testify to this and say the reason is because it takes so much out of me to have to cover yet another story of a young teenage boy, black boy, this time shot in the back as he ran away from police. It is, obviously this is not about me. This is about the family and the young man who was killed. But I swear, we have to do this so many times. This happens in the United States so many times that being a person who covers it, you just can't physically give this your emotional space because it devastates you every single time. 17-year-old Antwon Rose, shot and killed earlier this week by a police officer who was literally sworn in just a few hours before the shooting. He had literally just taken his oath and been on his and was released to start his first day on the job. This young kid ran away from police officers, and as he ran, you see the video, he shot in the back. Now it's simple, folks. A person running away from you is not a threat to you. You could see in the video that he was not turning around and pointing. It could not have been that he was mistaken to have a gun. Because he didn't, first of all, he didn't have one. But then number two, you could clearly see in the video that their bodies are running completely opposite of the police officer. So all the police officer had to do was to get in his car and catch them or run after them. But what he did instead was to shoot two kids. One of them died. Antwon Rose. Now this guy, first day on the job, just sworn in. Now he's on administrative leave. This is just another example. This is another data point. A real life, a young man taken from his family, a mother who's not going to see her son again. Family members who are not going to see their brother, their cousin, friends who are not, a real human being. A young man, Antwon Rose, a very real life, who's now become a statistic of how frequently police officers use excessive force, deadly force against black people in situations that don't warrant them. There's not even much more to say about this, because if you really want to know what I think about this, you can go back to about 30 episodes that I've covered in my time doing this, where we've seen police officers kill people, kill black people, and even white. The case, I can't think of his name because there's so many names, but the case of the young white guy in the hotel room, I played the audio for you, where he was literally begging for his blanking life. He was begging on his knees, pleading, saying, I don't want to die. And the police officer shot him anyway. So it's not just black folks that I've had to cover. It's been white people too, killed by the police. Matter of fact, one of the very first stories I covered was of two teenage white girls who were killed by the police. And yet, who was this? At Prison Culture on Twitter, she pointed this out, and it's something that I've been saying for a long time, but she said it so succinctly. She said, white supremacy is absolutely willing to sacrifice their own in order to oppress black people. White people, white supremacists, white nationalists, they are absolutely willing to sit by and watch white people die at the hands of the police so that they never have to confront what the police are doing to black communities. My God, it just takes so much out of me to cover these stories, and because it seems like a never-ending cycle. And what do we do? Well, my job is to bring attention to it. I almost said hashtag, and I don't even want to. God, that's literally what. Anyway, I'm done. I can't even finish that thought. This sentence. Because it's just another day in America. That's all the time I have for you today, folks. I do apologize for having to end on such a grim note, but such are the times in which we live. I'm not going to make any appeal. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow. Definitely will see you tomorrow. I have an interview that I think you're going to be interested in, so I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.